Okay, step 9. So my name is Mark. I'm an alcoholic. Should probably turn the volume down on my phone so my little homeboy doesn't disturb me. Check your mail. All right, we're going to go like that because otherwise the alarm may not work. So step 9 is my favorite step, like hands down. Absolutely my all-time favorite step because it is the pinnacle of transformation of the human spirit, right? That's when all the shit that I broke, I get to fix. And that changes everything. Because what started on my journey in step 4 as the deconstruction of my shame, as not seeing myself as a bad person, but seeing myself as sick and a child of God who did some shitty things instead of being a shitty person, ends in the culmination, the arc of 4 through 9 ends in 9 with self-forgiveness. Because if I broke things, and it's not because I'm inherently shame-based and bad, then those things can be fixed with a modicum of effort. And I'm going to talk about karma a little bit. This is not technically in conference-approved literature, even though it's alluded to in Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers at length. Because Dr. Bob was oddly a very Eastern philosophical guy for a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant who came from Vermont and lived at the intellectual pinnacle of Akron, Ohio. That was sarcastic, just so you know. There's one great thing in Akron, Ohio. Besides Dr. Bob's house and Dr. Bob's grave and Founders Day, there's this place called Wally Waffle that is awesome. They got the best damn waffles ever. Also, there's a place called the Lock something or other, and it's on the same block as as Dr. Bob's old office and the Mayflower Hotel. And it's a bar and grill, but they specialize in grilled cheese sandwiches. It's phenomenal. You can get like dill Havarti and deep fried pickle grilled cheese sandwiches with and they give you a little cup of tomato sauce and the goldfish. It's awesome. I'm telling you, it's the best thing on the planet. But I have really bad taste. So what we're going to talk about is step 9. So here's the deal. A lot of the stuff in the text on step 9 is specific to who do you make amends to, and when do you make amends to, and what if this circumstance arises, and what if I cheated on my wife, and what if my girlfriend is this, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And there's very little introductory stuff, except really basically it starts kind of an overlap in step 8 and step 9 on page 76 and 77, and then it has some very important general ideas regarding the step. How do we approach it? And then Bill gets into a bunch of borderline apologetics, right? They are, right? Listen, I mean, there's some things in the book that I would prefer not to read, but being a dutiful student of the people that came before me, I do read them with my sponsees, even though some of them, To the Wives is a tad misogynistic and outdated and really could just be X'd out of the book completely. I think it's a load of shit, personally. To the Employers, whatever. Not to the Employers, the Family Afterward, also, it's you're just going to tell me what a giant asshole I was. I already know that by the time I'm at that part of the book. You don't need to remind me. And To the Employers is also a weird thing. But I do use that because oddly enough, To the Employers has got this really kind of bizarre kind of instruction manual for sponsorship built into it. It's really interesting, So you can really kind of suss out some really good things for sponsorship that you cannot get out of the AA pamphlet, Questions and Answers on Sponsorship, which is an amazing pamphlet. I encourage everybody to read all the pamphlets and be like me and be a total dork, or you could just, ask somebody that has read them and they'll tell you what it says. Because we have a lot of debates and arguments in the society, right? Well, you can't take this drug or that drug. I'm like, well, have you read the pamphlet, Members of Alcoholics Anonymous and Other Drugs? No, I haven't. Well, maybe you should, because it's 64 freaking pages, which means that there's information in there you might want to know about before you open your mouth. You're doing a lot of this, I need to do more of that. Not you guys, I'm just saying. Wow, not a very happy crowd. Might know. All right, so let's talk about it. First of all, let's talk about the step itself. It says, and I quote, who would like to read the step? Somebody, anybody. Go for it.
Step 9, need to recommend to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others.
Awesome. Here's some things we need to understand just on the straight wording of the step alone. We made direct amends, which means you actually have to go out and hustle and do it. Right? I got sober before Facebook and etherwebs and all that shit, and it was an effort. Like, I drove around with a Justin boot box full of amends letters in the back of my car for 3 years until I was able to give them all away, right? Literally. Like, I would write them all. I would follow the format that my sponsor gave me. They'd be driving around. I'll tell you a story. I ran into a guy at Cala Foods on Geary Boulevard in San Francisco who I gave money to, and he punched me in the throat and walked out and cashed the check 2 minutes later. And I called my sponsor. I'm like, dude, he socked me in the throat. And my sponsor says, well, is that the guy you took a dump on his car? I'm like, yeah. He goes, well, you got it coming. I'll tell you the entire story later. It's quite convoluted. Maybe afterwards. It's maybe not appropriate for all ages. So what we have to look at is it says we made direct amends, which means active. I have heard so many people in these rooms talk about, like, yeah, I made all my amends by just not drinking and not being a dick anymore. I'm like, yeah, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. You actually have to go out and try and fix the things you broke. You can't just go, oh, they're not broken. I don't see them. That's like my dog. Like, when she does something, and I'm like, bad dog, and she's like, what are you talking about? Oh, he can't see me. I know he can't see me. Like her ass is sticking off the couch and her head's behind the pillow. I know he totally can't see me. He totally cannot see me now, so I must not have done anything bad. Like, that's what that is. Get your head out of the sand. It doesn't work that way. You literally have to go out and work to get this stuff righted. Because if you don't, you will not have connection with your higher power. And it says it specifically that we made a generalized commitment that we were willing to go to any lengths. And then it goes on to say it again, right? That our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and our fellows, which means it's all about spiritual connection. And the only way I can connect truly in a new way to my higher power is to see myself as human and healed from the things I did to separate myself from that humanness. And the only way I can get there is by fixing the shit that I broke. It's kind of simple, right? So we have to understand that we have to go out and do the work. And then there's this other thing. It says, made direct amends wherever possible. It doesn't say whenever, like, yeah, it wasn't a good time yesterday when I bumped into him in the Cala Foods. I'm going to wait for, till about quarter to never and then do it. Like, that's not going to happen, right? I get to take my judgment out of it. It's not when I decide it's appropriate. Prudence is appropriate, and Bill talks about prudence a lot in the 12 and 12, right? But diverting out of fear, out of anxiety, and not doing it because I have a judgment is not how it works. I have to do it where it occurs. I bumped into that guy in Cala Foods, and I'm like, dude, hold on. And I ran out to my car, and I rifled through the Justin. I found it. I went in. I opened it up, and the check fell out when he opens it up. And he picks it up, and he goes like that. And he reads the letter, and he just goes, bam, and he drills me right in the middle of Cala Food, and then he walks out of the store. Literally, and by the time I composed myself and called my sponsor, and this was before you could, had that phone, I had the Nokia with the antenna, the one, and I called my sponsor, and you would call your bank, and then it would tell you the last 3 transactions. Remember that back in the day? Call Bank of America, you put in your thing. That guy had cashed that check literally within 30 seconds of me getting it, right? And then he socked me in the throat. So, what are you going to do? That's why it's step number 9. Because if that should happen to you in step number 2 or 4 or 5, you wouldn't stay sober. But by 9, you're already at that point where, I kind of own the stuff I did, which means I kind of got to have an expectation that maybe some things that I want are not good. And remember, we've already evolved, hopefully, past step 7, which is the step of trust. Right? I surrender what I do in 3. I surrender that trust in 7. Which means I may never know why it was okay for that dude to sock me in the throat, But I got to accept that it kind of was in that moment, for whatever reason. And I may never be privy to the answer. Even though revelation only occurs for me in retrospect, never in the moment, sometimes that retrospect never happens either. And I got to be willing to be okay with that, right? Like there's shit that I just don't get to know. I just got to do what I got to do. That's the way it is. That's the biggest lesson I've learned, right? So I have to do it wherever possible, which means it's circumstantial and situational, not opinionated and not dictated by my own desires and judgments, right? Except when it would hurt them or others. And I have to remember one thing that's super important. I am not another. That's important. Because I have heard that, so, well, I'm another. I don't want it to hurt me. I'm like, no. You're not another. You're you, they're there, others are others. That's how it works. So, what does he say? He writes down, he says, we are on the bottom of page 77 in the book, right? Wait a second, I lost my place, can't read my writing. Wherever, not where, okay, we move back. So, I am not another. Because remember, right, that we decide that we are willing, we agreed at the beginning that we are willing to go to any length for our victory over alcohol, page 76. And then he goes back to say it again, exactly what we're doing on the bottom of 77. He says, we are to sweep off our side of the street. I have to clean my mess, right? Realizing that nothing worthwhile can be accomplished if we do so, until we do so. That means in my life, as a sponsor, as a transmitter, as someone who's a part of this society, really becoming part of this society, not just peripheral, right? Understanding that I'm not alone. I'm really connected to people that have understand, because the shared idea of admitting that you have broken many things and being active in fixing them is a unique experience that is only shared by people that have that experience. Because you can talk about the concept of amends, but until you start to fix things, it's a deeply bonding place. It brings you into the center of the circle of this society of AA. And that's what we need to accomplish, because for me to live in all three legacies, right, I have to be centrally located, surrounded by my people in this society, right? I want to be a member in good standing. When I got sober in LA, we said this all the time. You don't hear it a lot out here. People will ask each other, are you a member in good standing? Like, that's important, right? And when I'm a member in good standing, I am truly a part. Because remember that the book says, I don't run to join that fellowship. I become amazed at the fellowship that grows up around me, right? That's the thing. It's organic, right? So that nothing can truly be accomplished until I do so, until I'm ready to really face the thing and try and do it. And we look at the other person and say their faults are not to be discussed. We only stick to our own because we're the ones that have done it. Perhaps, and then he goes on and he talks about this idea. Let me tell you a quick story. So when I very first got sober in the 90s, I might have come out of the penitentiary, and I may have been in a halfway house. Just saying. And so what do people that are like stuck in a halfway house who are ex-convicts do in their off time in the afternoon when there's no groups? We watch America's Most Wanted. Thank God, because that's what we do. So we're sitting around in the day room watching America's Most Wanted, and there's this story about a guy from Florida, oddly enough, gay man who killed his lover and then disappeared. Murdered his lover and disappeared. And they've got this guy, and they show this thing, and we're looking at him, and we're like, dude, that looks like Barry. You think that's Barry? Damn, that sure looks like Barry. And he is from Florida. And Barry was a guy who worked in treatment, worked at this halfway house. And he was a lovely gay man who was a drug and alcohol counselor, and just he was an amazing guy. This guy became my hero because he was in a blackout for 2 years, and he's the one that actually killed this person in a blackout. And he didn't remember. And so we went and we talked to the clinical director. We're like, we saw this thing on America's Most Wanted. Kind of looks like Barry. You might want to check this shit out. And so it turns out that it was, in fact, Barry. And Barry came to terms with it, and he turned himself in. He made a deal where he could do time in California, didn't get extradited back, took a plea, and went into the penitentiary, the CDC, the California Department of Corrections. And he was HIV positive, and at that time they didn't have medicines in the California Department of Correction, and he ended up dying 6.5 years later of full-blown AIDS. But in those 6 years, he started about 15 meetings that were organic meetings inside the penitentiary that had group numbers and had a voice in the district, where the inmate service representative or the drug and alcohol counselor of the facility became the GSR for those meetings. And this man was responsible individually for probably 200 to 300 people getting sober in the penitentiary. This guy became my hero. That he was willing to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune to make his life right and do what he needed to do. And in doing so, he was called to help these people. That I don't know if I have the moral fortitude to do that. I don't know. I don't know if I could or not, but he did. And it was the most amazing thing I ever saw in a man. Like, for real. Like, that was hardcore. Because, I mean, I've been to the penitentiary. I know what that looked like. I couldn't see myself voluntarily doing that. But he did, and he was an amazing guy, Barry. I always remember Barry. So we go on, and we jump through the book a little bit, and we turn to the next page. Well, now he starts to get in, to these kind of things. There are other people involved, and sometimes that's financial, and there may be romantic issues, and he starts going through it, and he ends up on page 83 on the 9-step promises. I take umbrage sometimes when people say that they're going to read the promises of AA, because they're not the promises of AA. The ones that we hear the most are the 9th-step promises. There's promises for every step. And in fact, very next page 84, bottom page 84, and we have cease fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned, is the beginning of the 10th-step promises. And those promises are super dope, and we're going to talk about them next week, because I strive, my entire goal in life is to live in a position of neutrality, safe and protected from everything. That is my goal. I want to do that so much. That is so like Zen, Dalai Lama, transcendent, like Thich Nhat Hanh, Plum Village kind of vibe. Like, I just want that so bad. Instead of having to like yell at bad clients and go, "You're an asshole," it's not what I want. But apparently, according to step 7, I don't get to choose which defects I keep. It's God's choice, as you can plainly see. So, just saying. So, remember that in step 4, I start to deconstruct my shame. I start to see myself driven by guilt, right? The fear, which is false evidence appearing real, that makes me overcompensate, that backfires and ends up causing me shame for me to feel bad about who I am. I start to come to terms with that in 6 and 7. I share with another person in 5. I make a list of everybody I've harmed in 8, which, by the way, is everyone I've ever met in my entire life until I got sober because I was a bit of a jerk. Right? And then finally I start to put those things right. And when I start to put those things right, the shame changes. It gets transformed. One of my favorite lines is on page 32 in As Bill Sees It. And it's Dr. Bob talking about the description of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he says, Alcoholics Anonymous is the success story in no ordinary sense of the word. Right? It's extraordinary in its nature. It's no ordinary success story in the ordinary sense of the word. He says it is the story of suffering transmuted under grace into spiritual progress. Like, that's it. Like, I take the self-inflicted suffering of thinking that I'm a horrible person, have to punish myself. I change it into pain, which is the touchstone of all growth, and that becomes the emotional growth or change. That's what happens. That's a spiritual resplendentness for me. So that's an amazing description. So let's jump ahead into the 12 and 12. Because like I said, there's a lot of specifics. He talks about, well, should you make an amends to your wife or this, that, or the other. And I don't know if any of you have ever read Nell Wing's book, which is not conference-approved literature, but without going too far afield, you should probably give it a gander. There's also a book by a guy named it's called Ernest Kurtz, called Not God's Unofficial History of Alcoholics Anonymous. Very good book. There's a lot of good books. there's actually a really weird meeting at the Train Track Club in Boca on Saturday, and it's a literature meeting that is only non-conference approved literature. It's very strange meeting. It's only reading like things that are not conference approved about AA. It's a super weird meeting. All right, so let's look if you got your 12 and 12 so the promises. I forgot to do the promises. Promises are on page 83, right? If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we're halfway through. Halfway through with what? The steps? No, halfway through with the 9th step, right? Which means even if I'm pursuing the act of making amends, sometimes I can't, which means I write those letters and I pack them around because, look, my sponsor made me write letters every single amends I made. Because I can look at you and go, I really like you. I can look at you and go, I really like you. Same 3 words, total different meaning. I'm a grand manipulator who can change anything that comes out of my mouth. So what he made me do was he made me do an outline. I had an outline. I followed the outline. I wrote a letter. I signed it. I put my number on it. And if it was a financial amends, it had a payment schedule and a check enclosed, and I handed it to the person. And the person would then read it, and if they wanted to talk, then we would engage. Because I can manipulate. Listen, I'm a professional liar, in essence, basically. I work in treatment. I'm a therapist. I'm a clergyman. I got all these letters after my name. My entire job is to trick people into doing shit they don't want to do and then make them think it was their idea in the first place. Getting people that don't want to get sober is that job. That's it. That is my entire job. So I have always had that. The difference is now I am no longer Anakin. I'm Luke. I have come over for the dark side, and I have taken that skill set and I've brought it to something else, right? And hopefully in the eyes of God, according to the Thomas Merton prayer, my desire to please him is enough to please him. Because I'm a human being. I got no idea what God's will for me is. I can guess. It's supposition, but the truth is I'll never know. I don't know. I never know. But what I do know is that I desire to please that higher power, and I also hope that that desire is pleasing in and of itself. And if I do that, I'll be led by the right road. It's one of my favorite prayers. It's the Thomas Merton prayer. If anybody, it's kind of an awesome prayer. Basically it says, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but I want to do the right thing, and that should be good enough. And if I continue to have that want, I'm going to be led the right way. It's a great prayer. So I think there's a missing step, and we were talking about this earlier. I think there's a step in between 9 and 10, and it's really not in any book, and you're probably not going to hear anybody talk about it, but I think it's the step of forgiveness. And I think that step is the result of a thorough 9th step, but it also needs to be worked, because part of this is asking for forgiveness. I have my guys, when they do their amends, ask for forgiveness. A lot of times the answer is no. But you still have to ask, right? It's important to ask, right? Because you should desire that forgiveness. However, if you yourself are giving forgiveness, you should never tell the person unless they genuinely ask for it. Because if I go around going, I forgive you, I forgive you, I forgive you, you're going to look at me and go, who the hell does he think he can forgive me? I mean, first of all, I didn't do anything. Like, shut up. Like, what are you talking about, right? There's some certain things that have to happen in forgiveness, so it needs to be practiced. You start to feel the forgiveness in the action of the 9th step, especially when you're halfway through and you're starting to have these promises, right? And these promises are amazing. Fear of financial insecurity will lead you. It doesn't say financial insecurity. Well, it says the fear of it will lead you, right? You will start to understand things that baffled you, right? God will handle things. Self-seeking will slip away. It slowly disappears without your knowledge in terms of grace. These things will come, right? And then I can engage in this practice of forgiveness. I have to be anonymous about my forgiveness, which is not tell you. I have to be private about it, which is not tell anybody else. And I have to be final about it, which means if I forgive you and I practice that forgiveness through prayer, I cannot have that resentment again. And the more I pray, the less likely I am to have that resentment. And when I do that, I start to realize the profound message that started in step 4, which is that this man is spiritually sick like me. So how can I be mad at somebody who's sick? I can't. My anger, angst, and ire gets transmitted into empathy and compassion. And that's the change that happens, right? The spiritual experience, Appendix 2, defines it as a profound alteration in my reaction to life. Well, the alteration is I don't react, I respond. I respond conscientiously and spiritually by these practices. I practice forgiveness of others, and I think it's beautiful. On page, and oddly enough, the 9-step promises are on page 83. It's also in the 12 and 12, the same page that the 9th step starts. Go figure. Some shit just happens. The very first sentence, good judgment and a careful sense of timing, courage, and prudence. These are the qualities we shall need when we take step 9. Bill loves the word prudence. Loves it. Uses it all the time in the concepts. Over and over again. What exactly is prudence? That's what I always ask. What did he say?
Middle ground between fear and recklessness.
Correct. The middle ground of smooth sailing between fear and recklessness. Prudence is concern without worry. That means it's a pragmatic approach of vigilance without being driven by anxiety or fear. That's it, right? That's cool, right? That is the promise of situational awareness, knowing what's going on, knowing what's coming, not driven by fear, not ruminating on the past and been driven by that anxiety and the thing. It's being aware, conscientious, and concise without being driven by fear. That's what people say, well, how do I have a plan? You know, I'm not supposed to live in the future. Well, no, you're supposed to have a plan. You're just not supposed to have what you had before you got sober, which is plots. Right? Because that's what I had. I didn't have plans. I had plots. My plot was, if I got to go from A to Z and I got 26 days to do it, how do I spend 25 of those days trying to figure out how to circumvent B through Y and then magically end up at Z? Right. The amount of effort that shit took, I never got to Z. I always ended up at Y, and then I just threw my hands up and said, fuck it. Because that was the way I did it, right? So he says that we have to have this prudence, right? This concern without worry. And then we jump down, he says, there will be those, he talks about these 4 measures of organization of these responses, right? He's recalling looking at the 8-step list, and he says, you got to categorize these things. And this is really sick. He says, there will be those that ought to be dealt with as soon as we become reasonably confident that we can maintain our sobriety. That means there's the absolute necessity amends that I have to make, as long as I'm fairly confident, usually at sponsor direction, that I can do this and still maintain my sobriety. That's the first one. Priority number 1. Second priority, there'll be those to whom we can only make partial restitution. Right? Lest complete disclosures to them or others would do more harm than good. Not to me, but to them or others. Right? So we can do partial, and then maybe as they start to heal, we can increase the veracity and truth of our amends and fix even deeper things that we've broken. There's the other case, the third level, right? Where action ought to be deferred. Not that I'm not going to do it. It's that I'm going to put it off, right? Under the direction, because it is not the correct where for it. Not that it's not the correct when, it's just not the correct where. Because doing it in that place, not at that time, would create a problem for that person or someone else. And still others, by which the very nature of the situation shall never be able to be made directly by personal contact at all. These are the living amends. And these are the ones that are sometimes the hardest to do. So, I got some anecdotal stories that we can go into, which will fit into this. I could tell you some kind of crazy, amazing stories. So, I had a sponsee in Pennsylvania. I picked this kid up. Turns out that he's a real Pennsyltuckian, you know. Pennsylvania is like Philly and Pittsburgh with Kentucky in the middle, and they call it Pennsyltucky. So when I moved there, my wife's a Southern girl. It's so funny. We moved there, and we'd be driving around. There'd be all these Confederate flags all over. My wife would look at me. She goes, "Don't these dummies know they're Yankees?" I don't know. Apparently you do, but you know. So this kid was a real a little bit of a hillbilly, a lovely kid. So he asked me to sponsor him. He comes in to a noon meeting I'm speaking at, and he's there like 5 minutes late, so he doesn't hear my introduction to who I am. And he's listening, and after the meeting he's talking, he goes, "Would you sponsor me?" I'm like, "Sure, why don't you come to my house and tell me your story. We'll drive in my car." And he starts telling me a story that when he was about 12, he would go to his cousins in Mississippi, and he got indoctrinated into brown shirts, became a Hitler Youth child, then became a skinhead. And so I'm like, this dude is gonna flip shit when he walks into my house, because there's just like Judaica everywhere. Like the menorah's over here and the Torah on that side. Like this guy is gonna freak out. I got a giant freaking needlepoint that my mom made of Jerusalem. The thing's literally like fills one whole wall. I'm like, this kid is gonna shit his pants completely. So he comes in, and I shit you. He actually asked me where I kept my Jew gold. I kid you not, that's what he asked me. I kid you not. So he comes in, so he's like, after he gets over the shell shock, right? He starts talking, we start talking, he tells me his whole story. And he was involved in a hate crime, in a physical beating, in a hate crime, and with a bunch of other guys. And 2 years later, the guy that was assaulted died. And he didn't know how to make the amends. And so I had a friend from LA whose name was Tim Zoll. And I use his full name because he's okay with the breaking of his anonymity because he's a professional as well. And he's a sober guy, he's a guy from my home group. And he was an ex-skinhead who now works for the Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles at the Museum of Tolerance. And he works in an outreach capacity with a gay man who he did a violent crime on 20 years earlier. They are now partners in this project of tolerance. When he assaulted this guy in a gay bashing 20 years earlier when he was a skinhead, they now work together at the Museum of Tolerance. So I called out my boy Tim and I said, "Listen, I got this kid, and I need to pull a little rabbinical juice card, and I need a private tour of the Museum of Holocaust Museum, the Museum of Tolerance, with a survivor, and then I'm going to bring this guy for you," because this guy was pretty active. "I'm going to bring this guy for you to have him debriefed." So I arrange it. I pay for this guy. We fly out to LA from Pennsylvania. This is how hillbilly this kid is. He saw the Pacific Ocean before he saw the Atlantic Ocean. He's from Pennsylvania. It's literally not that far to the Atlantic Ocean. Seriously, it's not. Right? And so we take him out, and I set it up before the museum opens that he gets a private tour. And I leave him, and I go to where did I go to have breakfast? I left him to go have breakfast somewhere like, I don't even remember, Cantor's. I went to Cantor's to have breakfast. So I go to Cantor's, and I come back, and I go in. They're still not open. I brought him there like 8. It's now like 11:30. They open at noon, and I'm looking around, and I find him with the 86-year-old Holocaust survivor with a number on his wrist in the mock-up of the gas chamber, and he's just crying on this guy. He's just ripped open, right? Ripped open. He went through the whole thing. So we go, and I take him, and we go to the beach, and we sit, and we talk about it, and we meditate, and we pray, and he goes, "So that's my 9th step for this thing." I said, No. That's just the beginning. That was your pre-9th step for this particular event. Tomorrow, you go to the Wiesenthal Center to the top floor, and you get debriefed for 8 hours, and you give the name of every person in every hate group you've ever known and ever been associated with. He's like, "I don't know if I can do that." I said, "Okay, but just know, bro, it's a long walk from LA to Pennsylvania." Just saying. And he did. And that was the beginning of a living amends. How do you make amends for something you can't make amends for? You have to engage in a karmic twist, right? And Dr. Bob talks about this karma, and Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. But my experience, and this is from my personal experience, is that karma is unique, right? And thank God that it's not one for one, right? Because if it was, the majority of us would be in dire straits. We would either be locked up, dead, or have other circumstances that were not so great. So if I gave my boy Ray here this big microphone stand, tell him to hurl it through the window and shatter the glass, how hard would that be?
Physically?
Yeah, not so much. It'd take him 2 seconds to destroy this pane of glass. But then if I had a big-ass truck dump a whole pile of pure white sand with a smelting furnace and a rolling sheeter, and then a bunch of aluminum and an aluminum bender, and told him to make the glass, straighten it out, form the mullions, and reinstall the window, how much effort would that take?
Huge.
Huge, right? Huge amounts of effort. Because destructive energy is easier than constructive energy. Which means that the unit value of destructive force is far less than a single unit value of constructive or restitutional force. Which means even though I believe that I have done so much damage in my past, that my amends, my ninth step might be overwhelming, I have to realize when it comes to the karmic reality, right? And this is physics as well. Constructive energy has a higher value than destructive energy. That means if I genuinely look to fix the things that I have broken, I can rectify quite a substantial amount of things that I've broken. Because the effort is commensurate. Because the effort that I use to fix covers a lot of the shitty effort that I use to break. And that's the beauty. Everyone in this room is God's favorite because you have chosen to be chosen. Because if this is the worst of your karma, even if you're having the shittiest day of your life, you are definitely God's favorite. You are ahead of the curve. Because if karma was 1 for 1, the majority of us would probably not be in this room. Right? I don't hold by guys that say, I should have died. I hold by, I could have died, but I didn't. Right? And that's the truth. And so that's the beauty of this act. So a lot of the living amends in that constructive thing, this is AA. We don't get absolution. We have to fix what we've broken. Right? We cannot magically take the negative energy of that act and poof, turn it into positivity. However, through this process of fixing, I can now take that fix, include it in my story, and pay it forward to someone in the hopes of them not doing the same thing. And even though the negative energy of the things that I've destroyed remains negative, I balance that karmic scale by what I contribute positively, and even preemptively by carrying my story and hopefully helping someone else not do the same thing. Right? There is no magic twist where the past that was negative becomes positive, but I turn it into that, right? That is the suffering transmuted under grace into spiritual progress. That's how it works. He goes on page 84 to say, it may be unwise at this stage, right? He's talking about slowing down and having this prudence in making amends, right? It may be unwise to rehash certain harrowing episodes, right? And we may need to wait, right? Because if you jump into it too fast, you may have to make an amends for the amends you just made making an amends. That's no bueno. That is bad luck. When I got to make an amends for my amends, that's horrible. That's horrible. That's a double, I'm an idiot. Like, double down on idiot, right? Yeah. So, good judgment will suggest that we ought to take our time and that we may be willing to reveal the very worst. We must remember, this is one of the most important sentences in the 12 and 12, that we cannot buy our own peace of mind at the expense of others. We cannot buy our own peace of mind at the expense of others. Because then I got to really make an amends for the amends. Because not only did I fuck up the amends, but I fucked them up while I was making the amends. And that is not cool. Because my goal really is to not be a dick. Like when I got sober, my sponsors told me there's only 2 things you got to do to stay sober forever. Don't pick up a drink and don't be a dick. The drink part's the easy part. It really, really is. The dick part is not so easy, and it takes forever, and you never get it. Like, it's so funny. You know, I'm going to drop a little Talmudic knowledge on you guys right now. Put on my Rabbi yarmulke instead of hat. You get it? So there's a litany. There's 613 commandments in the Old Testament. There's a litany of thou shalt nots and thou shalts. 365 thou shalt nots. 243 thou shalt. And nowhere does it say what it tells you a lot what the punishment for the thou shalt nots are, but it doesn't tell you what the reward for the thou shalls are, except for one exception. There are 2 thou shalls. One of them is to shoo the mother bird away from the nest before you collect the eggs so that it will come back. And the other one is to honor your father and mother. And both of those have the same reward, which is long life. In the Ten Commandments in Hebrew it says, Kaveret avicha v'et imecha laman yarechun yamecha. Honor your father and mother, so your days shall be long. It says the same thing. You have a long life if you take consideration of shooing the mother bird away so she doesn't have the trauma of you stealing her young and she comes back to the nest. One takes 3 seconds that a drunken-ass farmer can do at 2 in the morning because he's trying to get eggs for breakfast. And the other one takes your entire life and you never get it right. Yet they both have the same result. Because I'm not to judge the reward of what's a strong positive action and what's not. I don't get to choose. I got to do them all, right? The result happens karmically, and I don't know what that is, right? So I have to be willing to make amends to them all, and I have to directly try to do this even when I can't. So I cannot grow at the expense of someone else. I can't do it backwards. He goes on page 85 that he says, what do I got here? On page 85 he goes, we do not want to rest on our laurels, right? He's talking about how when we do a small amends or a beginning amends, okay, homeboy, we do a small amends, right? And then we start to have some relief, right? We start to feel a certain way. And we're like, oh, you know what, I'm in the glow. Like, let's say I make an amends and it's really responded well. It just makes me feel awesome. Like someone forgives me and tells me they love me and says all they ever wanted me to see was to be happy. Like, that shit makes me feel a certain way, right? And I can't bask in that. I can't rest on my laurels and let that carry me. I have to move with that power into the next amends. You guys know where rest on your laurels comes from, right? Anybody? Okay, so Caesar, when he would conquer another country, would come back to Rome, and they would put an acanthus laurel on his head, his crown, and it was made out of a tree, or shrubbery, basically. And he would take it home to his big Caesar house, and he'd put it on one of those bust statues of himself. The thing was made out of a bush, which means it didn't really last very long, which means the accomplishments of the past fade, because it would biodegrade in a couple weeks, and you'd go to look at all his accomplishments, and there'd be nothing there except a bunch of brown sticks and dirt on the floor. Like, shit, gotta go conquer somebody else. Right? And that's the whole thing. Those things will fade, right? And I can't allow that to happen to me, right? We will often manufacture plausible excuses for dodging the issues entirely, or we may just procrastinate, telling ourselves that time is not yet, when in reality, we have already passed up many a fine chance to right a serious wrong. Let's not talk prudence while practicing evasion. That's real, right? Let's not talk prudence while practicing evasion, because I am super awesome at that. Just so you know, I will procrastinate and evade to the nth degree. So let me close with another little quick story, okay? Because we're at the end, and there's so much about step 9. We could really talk. There's so much. Let me just give you a quick rundown of 2 things. The letters that I do are formatted like this: where I am in my recovery and what I'm doing right now, and why I'm doing what I'm doing. What I did, just the facts. No manipulations, no emotions, just that shit needs to be Joe Friday. Just the facts, right? Like Dragnet, just the facts, right? Just the facts. What I did, specifically, and through guidance of my sponsor, not to the point of harming them or someone else, right? Okay? Then, a mea culpa. A true apology. A true heartfelt I'm sorry. A true heartfelt it was my fault. I was wrong, and I don't want to be wrong again. And a request for forgiveness, if it's appropriate. Then I have to present a plan to not do this again. This is the plan I have to not live like this anymore. And then a request for the person I'm making amends to give me input or help me with that plan in any way they see fit. Because after I have harmed someone, asking them to help me empowers them in a position to be active in their own healing from that wound. You understand? And the only other one is if there's a financial amends, there's a payment schedule and a check. Right? But that is my format that I use all the time. So, I told you Steve's story. Let me close with a story that happened to me. So, I grew up with a buddy of mine. His name was Leon. He's a sober guy, and we grew up in San Francisco. And Leon was a Sephardic Jew whose parents were from Egypt, and they were kind of weird cats. First of all, his dad's name was Rico, and his mom's name was Lola. It was like that song. Her name was Lola. His name was Rico. I couldn't get that shit out of my mind. And so they both worked, and we would go over to his house and get high. And it was one of those houses where, like, they have that clear cover on all the furniture, and it's not that thin-ass one, it's that thick one that zips in and it makes that noise when you sit in it. And they had, like, a giant hookah in the living room with, like, scimitars on the wall. Like, it's a scary-ass place. Like, that place frightened the shit out of me. And so one day we were there, and we were getting high, and he sort of, I don't know, nodded out a little bit, and I thought that would be an awesome opportunity to go into his parents' bedroom and rifle his mom's jewelry box. So I did. And I didn't want to take, like, the big ring on top, because that's a dead giveaway, right? So I was going in the bottom, and I found, like, some colored stone filigree thing. I'm like, that looks sort of Middle Eastern, I'll steal that one. And I pocketed it. And I sold it, and I got 20, $30 for it, whatever it was. So fast forward, almost 30 years later, I'm chairing a meeting in Santa Monica, California. This was in San Francisco. I'm chairing a meeting in Santa Monica, California, and it's a meeting that's called the In the Basket meeting. It's an as-built. The speaker will speak for 10 minutes and pull names out of the basket to call on people to share. So there's a greeter with a guy behind him that takes the names and puts it in the basket. So I'm standing behind this guy, and all of a sudden, here comes my buddy Leon walking up. I didn't even know he was sober. He's in San Francisco. I'm in LA. I'm like, Leon, homie, what's up, dog? He's like, oh my God, Mark, what are you doing, bro? I'm like, I'm sober. He's like, I'm sober, dude. Awesome. So I start chit-chatting. I'm like, how are your folks? He goes, I don't know. They haven't spoken to me in over 7 years. I'm like, what are you talking about? How sober are you? He goes, I'm 5.5 years sober. I got a new wife. I got 2 kids. My parents haven't seen the kids. They haven't talked to me in over 5 years. In over 7 or 8 years. I'm like, God, that sucks, dude. Because I don't know what it is. I've tried to make amends to them. I've written them letters. I've reached out. They won't take my calls. They won't answer. They won't talk to me. 2 days later, I'm sitting on the beach, smoking a cigar, and I'm like, thinking about the whole thing. I'm like, holy shit. I stole a ring from his mom. I need to make amends for that. So I call a couple buddies. I draw a picture of it. I send it to a guy, a jeweler friend of mine. He goes, hey, it's about this much money. I figure out what kind of stone it was. I write the amends letter. I put it in. I go up to see my folks a couple weeks later in San Francisco, and I call his mom. I'm like, hi, Lola, this is Mark. I was wondering if I could come by and talk to you. So I go into the house, and I sit on the creek. He's still got the fucking plastic on the thing. And I'm sitting there. There's 2 scimitars, and she's sitting in the chair, and I hand her the letter, and she opens the letter, and she puts the envelope and the check on the counter. She reads the letter. She drops the letter. She screams once, starts crying hysterically, and runs out of the room. And just leaves me there. And I'm looking at my watch. I'm like, 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 7 minutes, 10 minutes. And I'm thinking, I bet she went to go get the scimitars that are not on the wall, the ones that are like on the sharpening stone. She's going to come out and chop my fucking head off. And I'm like, and so I call my sponsor. I'm like, what do I do? He goes, give it 5 more minutes and then run. And I'm like, I can do that shit, all right? So I give it 5 more minutes. She doesn't come. I mean, she's nowhere. I'm literally sitting on the plastic covered couch for 20 minutes. I'm like, I am out of here. This is creeping me out. So I leave and I go to this little coffee shop to like ponder what happened. And he always tells me to meditate after. And the phone rings and it's her. And I'm like, ooh. And she's like, would you come back? I'm like, fuck. So I call my sponsor and I tell him, and he's like, well, you got to go back. And I'm like, dude, are you kidding me? So I said, okay, I tell you the address just in case. If I don't call you in an hour, call the police. So I go back and I walk in and Rico is there now. And I'm like, shit, they're going to kill me. They're going to cut me up. They're going to bury me in the backyard. And they both run and embrace me and start crying hysterically, and they start thanking me. And I'm like, what's going on? And they said, well, we know that you and Leon were drug addicts. And about 12 years ago, we started going to Al-Anon, and we got a sponsor. And we worked our own steps. And when Leon said he got sober, we didn't believe it because he never made amends for stealing my mother's ring. Like, that shit is weird, right? And so they had called him in the interim and all this. And so I'm driving back home and my phone rings and it's Leon. He starts yelling at me. Because now I had to make an amends to him for making the amends to his parents, even though it was a solid amends. I didn't do it to heal that family, but they were down in LA the next weekend seeing their grandchildren for the first time. After not speaking to their son for over 7 years. Because of a ring I fucking stole 25 years earlier. Like, that shit only happens in this world, right? Only in this world, right? Because I'm willing to go to any lengths to win the victory over alcohol. Thanks for letting me share.